Testing 1 2 2 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Okay, we're good to go. All right, I've been given the green light, so I'm going to start. In an effort to try to get pretty much this demo done to a point where it makes some sense and not keep you all hostage too long, I've done some prep to get started here. Let me talk a little bit about how these pieces are made. As an example, this mug, the body itself is thrown, the handle is slip cast, and then the nuts, and then it's carved, and then the nuts and bolts are press molded, and then it's all stuck on. It's really not quite that simple, but I'll show you all about it. Before I get started, though, it's a matter of managing moisture on all these different processes. I've got some clay that's been thrown, some that's been slip cast, some that I'm press molding, and it needs to have something close to the similar moisture, or as it dries, pieces fall off. So I have to manage moisture of all these different things throughout the whole process. To that end, I'm going to start with making the nuts and bolts for a mug so that they can start to dry down to where I need them. So I have a little clay here. Here, let me move this back here so that's out of the way a little bit more for you. Is that better? Okay. So I just got some clay here, and what I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to grab a little clay and mush it into one of these molds, and then I'm going to press it against this canvas board here and take off all but enough so that it will stick to this non-pervious board. So it's like I'm making cookies. So I'm going to make a mug. It should have 5 nuts and 5 bolts. And inevitably, if I plan on that working just right, I'm going to mess 1 or 2 up. So we'll be making, 6 or 7 of each. That way, if I mess 1 up, I don't have to stop, and everything is at the right humidity, right moisture control. So this is kind of the repetitive, boring part of the thing. Interestingly enough, though, when I've got a lot of these that I'm doing, the little sprig molds here start absorbing clay, and after I've gotten 50 or 60 of these nuts or bolts pressed out onto a board, they're starting to resist letting go, and I need to dry these out again before I can use them to do some more. Huh? These are bisque molds. So I took a little clay, and I love hardware stores. I'll go through hardware stores and go to the fasteners section and like, what else is there that I can use? And I'll just press them in there and leave an impression. And I have a bunch of different ones that I use. I have some slotted screws. I have some just hex head. I have these flange bolts. This is my favorite one. I tend to use it a lot, and I have to tell myself to try something else sometime. This is part of our house. We did some laminate flooring in our great room, and it's non-porous, so things stick to it, don't want to come off. Later on, I'll be using just a board. Things don't want to stick as much to that. So, again, like Jim was saying in the last demonstration, figuring out what any given situation requires and doing the thing that works. So those are the bolt heads, and now sometimes I don't leave enough clay on there. And now I need to do the nuts because, if you don't have the nuts on the inside of the cup to hold it together, it comes apart, right? So, oh, I have plenty of those. Let's go over to the other thing here. There we go. So ribs are used for a lot of things. As you can see, I'm using it just to minimize the amount of clay and give me a nice smooth surface here on these guys. I'm going to use it again in a different way shortly. You saw, if you were here for the last demo, you saw Jim using it kind of in a way I'm going to smooth down some areas of his piece that he's working on. By the way, yeah, continue to ask questions if you have them during this cooking show demo, and I'll be glad to give you an answer. And if I don't know the answer, I'll be glad to make one up. So one of the problems that I have when I make these sprig molds are they're straight-sided. The clay doesn't want to let go of it, and so you see me kind of wiggling it to get out of there. But it's all a matter of trying to fool the eye with these things. And you know, I know I've done my job well if people go up to the piece and they go, yeah, no, it's all clay. Truly is all clay. So I was asked what kind of clay that I need, and I thought, you know, I'm not going to put them through all that stuff. I'll bring a pound of clay, and it'll be well more than I need. My problem in our studio is just trying to keep the area around my workspace neat enough and not create a lot of dust to get up into the air we're breathing. My studio partner does her best to try to keep me in line, but that's a tough row to hoe. So nuts and bolts, right? And we'll just hang on to those, let them dry for a little while, and be down to the humidity, the moisture content that I need. And I should be pretty much done with clay, in theory. Okay. So those are drying down to where I need them. And before I even did those, I took one of my molds and I made a handle out of it, some slip. I have 3 different size handle molds, and I just want to show you where they start up and where they end up before they go on. Now this has been, I've been trying to condition it so it's dry enough to release, but not so dry it starts to pull apart. Those of you who work with clay know that as the clay dries and it bisques and it vitrifies, it shrinks. So as it's drying in there, you know, I've got all these cuts here, and as it's drying, it's trying to pull itself apart. If I don't get it out in time, if I try to pull it out too soon, it just collapses, or it sticks to the mold and tears apart when I pop the mold apart. So we're lucky this time, at least. So there's that, and I like to try to minimize some of the potential stickiness. I'm taking off this cut. I don't need that bit. And then it's a matter of getting it out of the mold without deforming it. And the other thing is, I have really small diameter shapes, and if I don't make the mold correctly, and there's anything of an undercut, it doesn't want to come out. So molds with small diameters like this are a little bit tricky to make. Okay, so that's where it all starts. It's hollow. It has a lot of clay sticking out on the side. The threads are not well developed. I'm going to pass that around. You can see. And I'm not going to use that, so if you mush it up, don't worry about it. It's all fine. So in slip casting, these 2 parts of the mold are held together, as you saw with the rubber bands. And then you have, what I do is I take the dry trimmings from the clay I'm using and slake them down into a slurry slip. And I pour the clay into the mold and let it sit there, and the mold is porous and it absorbs the water and causes the clay to coat the inside of the mold cavity. And I let it sit there until enough of that clay is clung to the sides, and then I pour out the excess. Right? And the beautiful thing about doing that is I end up with a much lighter handle. Because the handle is lighter, I can make the walls of the mug lighter, and therefore the whole thing gets lighter because I can make the handle lighter. But I still have to have enough thickness to do some carving. All right, so while that's coming around, so the molds were made a long time ago because they need to be dry so that water can go into them as I use them. Then the slip was made using added water and then a deflocculant. And so that's all done well in advance, done before tonight by a long shot. And then because I needed leather hard and I wasn't going to have time to throw it and then trim it and do all that stuff. So I have my cooking show pieces right here. You remember I was talking about managing moisture content so that it stays consistent. So this is a leather hard mug body that has been thrown on the wheel and then trimmed. And when I'm throwing it on the wheel, I use an 1¼ inch dowel on the inside so that I make sure that the corners are square and the bottom is flat. So I use the end of the dowel to compress the clay at the bottom and to give me a nice sharp corner. Again, to make it look like it's not clay. That's the whole goal. But inside, I have here the handle for it. And it's been inside there, so it is hopefully the same moisture content as the mug body. So when it gets put on, it's the same. So now I'm going to take this mug body and be working on it. I'm not going to wrap this back up because as this is drying, this needs to dry as well. So it's managing moisture to a high degree of minutia to make it work. So the mug body has been thrown, it's been trimmed. When I throw my mug bodies, I throw them and I don't wire them off. I leave them on the bat. And then it gets dried down to leather hard. I don't have to hold it in place or anything. It's still stuck to the bat. And I can trim it right on the bat. And then at some point it gets dry enough that I can bend the bat a little bit and it'll pop right off. I have a nice smooth bottom. I can put my chops in there, put a little bit of a bevel so I've got a glazed drip edge that won't contact the shelf. And I've got a mug body that I can start working with. So now the other board. You might notice on this guy that this seam is not vertical. It's got a bit of an angle to it. Because I believe that a little bit of imperfection really makes it perfect. And so sometimes I mess up, and it's okay, because it's not perfect anymore, and it's okay. So I'm going to carve this in there, and then after I've got that in place, I know where my edge is going to be, and then I'm going to take this off and try to make it look like I wrapped some metal around and screwed it together. That's the goal. In the meantime, these things are setting up and drying. I'll get them out of the way. All right, so what I do with that is I take my fancy dancy trimming tool, and I'm going to hang this guy over the edge of this board a little bit. Actually, I'm going to hang it over the edge of the table. John, I'm going to scoot back a little bit. I hope that's not a problem for you. Take a straight edge. Sure, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, and then I just ran into this thing and made a mark, so that's where I'll carve the seam. And I'm just going to press this straight edge down tight against the table, give it a little bit of an angle, and just start carving into it. Now the key here is don't carve through it. It's a little thing, I realize, and try to be consistent so you have a consistent edge to it. And it's really easy, it seems sometimes, to take too much. There you go, off here and there. And this is where I start messing up the studio floor. So, and I can use the shadow to tell me if I'm anywhere close, but you can see there's a rough image for it right there, right? So then I got to clean that up because, again, I'm trying to fool the eye on this. And to do this, I just take my rib and I give it a good healthy bend, and I'll just scrape it up and clean it off a little bit, scrape it up and clean it off, and just take advantage of that curve. And then I'll come in this way as well. Oh, this is really a little softer than it needs to be. Okay. You know, demos never work, right? Demos are really experiments where you get to show off how you screw things up. So we'll see. So this is a little softer than I needed it to be. But the goal is to get this nice and smooth and consistent, not get so thin that it's going to be a problem. So by the time I get to this point here, I have made the mold, which I'll reuse. I've made handles, usually 3 or 4 or a dozen handles at a time. I've made a bunch of mug bodies and I've trimmed them or are in a state of ready to trim. So I've already got a fair amount of time and effort into each one of these. And now it gets to be kind of the tricky bits. And I'm really concerned about a nice clean edge that looks like an edge of a metal, and that isn't it yet, but it's getting closer. Line this back up and take another cleanup cut. Getting a little better. I usually take a fair amount of time doing this, and I probably won't take as much as I normally do this time around, just so that I'm not boring you all to tears. One of my favorite tricks when I'm doing this is to ruin that edge and have to carve it a little further back, which I think I've just done. Yep. All right, we're getting somewhere close here. So, a really well-known local potter once said something that is absolutely true when you're working with clay. Everything matters. Patrick Horsley's quote, everything matters. So I'm talking about moisture matching. I'm talking about the little details that when you're trying to fool the eye are important to maintain. And so it's the crispness of the edges and the crispness of the inside corner. It's the consistency of the cut and so on. But then again, now I've taken away this little bevel that is my glaze safe drip edge on there. So I'm going to put that back where I just took this out with a little scrape of my rib. Okay. All right, so that's pretty good. Now, take a minute and do a little cleanup.
It's getting close to work shift switch over. Almost 4 o'clock.
Okay. So now I need to cut this edge, and it needs to try to be as close to one even ramp up to this level on this side when I do it. Just close enough that you believe it, even if it's not completely right. A little flexible ruler is my guide. Position this down here and wrap it as far around as I think I can get away with. And then the X-Acto knife. And when I have a little soft one like this, my favorite mistake to make is I end up putting too much pressure and squeezing it out around. Okay, so there's that. And talked about a really clean, crisp edge to cut with. Can't beat this. Line it up with the carve, and then I have that little secret bit. Now, again, everything matters. You're going to wrap your lips on this. It should be comfortable. You shouldn't go like, that's edgy. So I'm going to take care of that. I'm just going to take a little bit of that edge off, inside and outside, because I want it to be comfortable. I want you not to even notice it. If I do it right, you're drinking your cup of coffee or you're enjoying your pint of beer or whatever you're hot chocolate or whatever you're having, and you're not even aware of that. It just works and you're not aware of it. Right. But we want this to be smooth. So I still want it to look kind of flat like it's the edge of metal, but I want it to be comfortable. So I'm going to try to match this almost flat with a little bit of rounded edges. And you know, a damp smudge does a pretty good job doing that. And again, this is clay and it doesn't want to do what I want it to do. So I have to look at it and listen to it and talk with it and tell it what it needs to be doing. And in the process of softening these edges, a couple of things have happened. I'm even going to soften this because this is not going to have lips on it, but I don't want it rough in your hand. And I'm going to take care of this little edge down here because I don't want it rough in your hand. But what's happened, and you can't see it very well from there, but as I soften this edge, it kind of bulged out a little bit. And so it's not straight up the side. So I have to fix that. And that means I'm going to have to go back with a sponge and do a little bit more cleaning on that edge to get that softness back in again. Everything matters. Okay, so that's something pretty close to what they normally are like. There's the first bit to it. Now, you've seen the handle, it's come around, right? It came back, great. Okay, so it's just a thin edge, and to attach that to a mug, there's not going to be a lot of room to attach it. So if I was to spend the time to clean this up, come back microphone, and prepare it, I would clean off all this extra clay that oozed out here and round it down nice and smoothly, and take a lot of time to do that. It's what, almost a half an hour to do this when I do it, Deb? Yeah. So it takes a long time to clean these up nicely and reestablish any imperfections in the grooves on the threads. But before I can make this handle usable and know that it's going to have a nice secure attachment to the mug and it will last, it will handle being in the dishwasher, I need more surface for it to stick on there. So what I'm going to do is take my needle tool. Imagine this has all been cleaned up and pretty, and it isn't yet. I'm going to just take my needle tool and I'm going to just kind of scuff up the inside here. And I'm going to do this on both of them. And then I'm going to grab the glue, aka slip. Just, you know, when I throw, I end up with a bunch of this slop off my wheel. And I'm just going to smear a bunch of this on the inside. Trying to make this all visible for you all. And then I'm going to take some clay. I know I had some clay around here. What do I do with it? Over here in the corner, hiding in the camo. All right, so, and I'm going to make kind of a little cone because it's a little bit of a taper in there, and I'm going to just mush that in there and press it in again without deforming the handle itself. And you need to do this while it's still fairly moist. Why? Because this clay is really moist, and it's going to have a better chance to shrink than this is. So it could shrink away from the inside if there's a huge moisture variance to it. So I'm going to put that in there, and then I'm going to clean that all off. I'm going to do that to both of them. And then what happens then? What is the new condition that's happened after I've filled both of these ends with clay? I have trapped air, exactly, which could be a problem, right? Well, I have a secret there. All right, so I'm going to just plug both of these up because this gives me a really nice surface, right? All right. So, but then I have an air bubble. So what I do is I have a really, really fine pin tool, not a big fat nail like this one here, but I will take this pin tool and I'll just do a little poke right there, another little poke right there, and it's a tiny, tiny hole. And it will allow air to escape as the place heats up and cools down. It works just fine, and then the glaze will seal it, so it won't be there at the end of the process. You won't see it, it's gone. So now I have a reasonable surface that I can stick on the mug body itself. I've got a lightweight handle. I've dealt with the air pocket. Again, like Jim saying in the last demo, it's all about problem solving and anticipating what's going to go next. Okay, so what's going to go next is I would put the handle on next, except for it might get in my way. It's time to do nuts and bolts. So kind of shifting gears here. So if you can imagine, this is a cookie sheet, and this is my spatula. I'm just going to slide these guys off where I can deal with them. And if I've done this right, there's enough clay that's been left on these guys to really stick it to this board, and at the same time, some's going to ooze out. And I have to deal with that, again, paying attention to all these details. What I try to do with my work is to make clay look like it's not clay, and we sometimes have an argument about that, the clay and I. Once in a while, I let the clay win, and I think, like, I'm just going to make a bowl. And the clay will tell me what it's going to, maybe it's going to be a vase, or it may turn into a platter, who knows, you know. All right, so I've got this clay that's kind of stuck out on the side, so now I'm going to take the time to trim all of that off with a light touch and a tool. And while I have that in my hand, I'm going to do some scoring on the back, because I need to have that to stick on. These are still soft, so I'm hoping they firm up a little bit so I don't distort them when I stick them on, but we'll see. As my dad would say, it's the challenges that make us grow. This is why I made 6 of them. Okay. There's the 6 bolts, or 5 bolts. Now we need the 5 nuts. Again, if we don't put the nuts on the inside, then of course it'll fall apart because there's nothing holding the bolts in. I believe in little surprises, little Easter eggs, and people will look at my work in the booth and they often just get a grin on their face and put them back down, and I'm okay with that because I've just added a smile to their day, and that works just fine for me. So those little Easter eggs are just a little treat. You'll find a lot of pots that have great little sayings on the bottom or on the inside of them. The other potters are doing the same thing. They're trying to add a little sunshine to your life. When I'm doing this and I've got a bunch of mugs to do, I usually will make enough nuts and bolts for like 3 mugs. And I get the first set on, and then I have to cover after I pull off the second set because it's starting to dry down, and then fully cover for the 3rd set, and then I start all over again with the next set of mugs. Again, managing moisture throughout. Okay, so now I want to put these on. Where do I want to put them? Well, 5 is a really good number. Well, I'm going to eyeball it, so I'm going to make a little mark, another little mark, And I'm going to guess where halfway is, and I'm going to check and see if I have halfway. Pretty close. And then I'm going to divide that in half. Yes, it does. Yeah. Thanks, T. And I'm going to score these before I slip and stick them on. And so I want to find those marks again. So I'm going to make big marks. And of course, when I put the nuts on the inside, I want them to line up. So the way I do that is I take the caliper and I find the outside divot and I hold the center of the caliper over the wall of the mug, hold it straight up and press in on the inside and make a little divot on the inside so that I have a mark to line up to. So a lot of these tricks I'm sure you can use when you're doing your thing, when you're thinking about how to make things come together. So some scoring. This mug is starting to feel a little bit cool. And what does that tell me? It's evaporating, right? So it's drying out, which is good because it was a little soft. Scoring the inside. All right, and I'll start with the outside. A little glue, and whenever you're touching things with slip, you should make sure that you put enough on that it oozes out. That way you know you've got enough to hold it into place. So you can see that's all nice and oozy, right? That will need to be cleaned up. Oddly enough, though, by the time I get back to it, some of the moisture will have gone out of that slip, and it will be less of a cleanup issue. So I bracket the outsides, because they're easy to find. And then it's a matter of dividing by 2 for the rest. And I'm not paying attention to really how these are lining up as far as rotation goes, but I am paying attention to how they line up along the line. Once in a while, I get a little bit of a wild idea, and what I'll do is I'll just put a hole through here and leave the top one out like I ran out of nuts and bolts. That, of course, minimizes the level of fill you can get with, but it is, because I can use those to line up more precisely the inside. But that may not be your choice when you do something like this on the outside and the inside. Oh, if you got enough slip on, they're not coming off. I've done demos where I've had teapots on legs, and I just stick them on there and I stand them right up on the legs. It's really pretty durable, pretty fast. Okay, now got to get the ones on the inside. So carve into the bottom of the nut, put a little glue on there. A little more than that. And line it up. Double check your line up. Mush it on. Now, what has happened inside here? Slip has squeezed out, right? Doesn't look good. I can deal with this stuff later because it's all available. So, some of my favorite tools start as popsicle sticks. That was just cut off and then a really sharp bevel put on there. And I can just reach in there and scrape off the excess slip from the visible parts of it. And then I move on to the next one. Make sure it's lining up. Move it around a little bit if you need to. You know, this one is not going to be up to my usual standards of quality, but I'll probably finish it and then I'll have one I can drink out of at home. So it'll be okay. For the longest time, I struggled with getting a specific result. Kind of the only way I could think of, and it was pretty manual, and it was effectively a workaround because I didn't find the right way to do it. Once in a while, you kind of have a flash of inspiration. It's while you're having a shower or you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you go, oh, I could do that. And all of a sudden, you've just saved yourself, 10 or 12 minutes working on a piece. Yeah, we won't be selling this one. And last but not least, all right, clean up that slip. I have a whole bunch of, I've got a little vessel on my studio table full of popsicle sticks. Some of them are used to help clean the grooves out on the threaded parts. I even have some bevels cut in so I can go back through and reestablish grooves. So popsicle sticks you can do a lot with. They're not hardwood, and you're going to be recreating that tool fairly frequently, but they're wonderful and they work well. All right, clean this bit off. Yeah, I got some good quantity of slip on some of these. It's good. I know they're not coming off. Some of my teapots in the past, I used hose spigot, just like you're on the outside of your house, as a spout. And I have been away from our booth and then come back and found that the knob has been turned and it's now laying next to the teapot. Thank you for that. So I have adapted to putting signs in the booth like mind the lids and the knobs don't turn, and which I guess is a compliment if I'm fooling them, so I guess. Yeah, or they're walking away and going, nobody saw that, did you? Okay. All right, so nuts and bolts established, excess slip carved off, the seam has been carved in there and the edge put on there. Now it's time to put this on. Problem is, this is a curved surface and this is a straight surface. If I put this on like this, what's going to happen is in the kiln, when the clay gets soft, this is going to flatten and it's going to have kind of a flat part to the mug, and I don't want that. So what I used to do was like start carving away on it, but I got smart. It happens once in a while. If you take the top of your tin can off and remove the bead at the same time, you have a very malleable, nice little knife edge that you can shape to what you want. So if I have a really wide diameter mug, then I can have one that's going to fit that. If I have a narrow diameter mug, I can have one that fits like that. And all I have to do, it's easier if I stand up to do this, is figure which one I want on the top and which one I want on the bottom. So I'll look at this and I'll say, this is not going to be as comfortable if it's up here under your finger. But this, because of its shape, will be more comfortable under your finger. So that's the one that goes on the top. Again, all things matter. So I will go through here and I will hold this straight, cut straight down. I have a nice curve and I'll check it. And the curve is just right. It fits nice and tight, but it may not line up this way. So if it doesn't, I'll fix that in a minute. And the bottom one's not too bad, but it could take a little bit more off the top of that one, a little bit more off the top of that one. So, a little thin slice there. A little thin slice there. Well, that's closer. Still not. Oh, it was. Yeah, it absolutely was. But you start, I don't know, I go into kitchen stores and I'm looking at clay tools. You know, and going to a hardware store, I'm looking at clay tools. Um, and then sometimes when you're in the kitchen, you go, oh, that's a clay tool too. Open up a can of beans for the chili or whatever, and like, oh, I could cut my finger on that, or maybe some clay. Oh, there we go. Okay, now, who's going to be drinking out of this? Are they a left-hander or are they a right-hander? So if I put the mug handle here, that's a left-hander mug, right? Because the nuts and bolts are in the way. If I put the handle over here, it's a right-hander mug because the nuts and bolts are in the way. So where does the handle go? Somewhere over here. Maybe not perfectly lined up. A little variety is good. So too bad. They have to get one of their own. Well, I'm making it for, I'm not left-hand favorable or right-hand favorable. My bride, when we were building our kiln shed, driving nails, and to watch her, and her arm got tired, and without skipping a beat, she just kept going, and she kept hitting the nail. I would have been all around the nail. So I celebrate this alternative to my way of being. Anyway, so I'm going to put the handle there. It's not lined up perfectly. It's off to the side, but there's still room for lips. It'll be okay, right? So then we need to carve it, and then another hot homemade tool. This is a piece of dowel with some tiny holes drilled in it and a little piece of some stainless steel wires, 4 pieces of that stuck in there with some epoxy, and that's my scratch tool. So I don't have to use the pin tool and go over it for hours and hours. I can just do that and be done with it. And that's done. And then what do I need to do is a whole lot of this. And again, you can't get too much slip on here. It's better to have it oozing all over the place and clean up rather than to not have enough. So I'll put a big gob on there usually, and then I make sure all the grooves are filled on this side. Get it down in there. And then again, that's the top, that's the bottom because of the comfort factor. And it goes on. And it wants to slide all over the place, but I'm going to hold it in place. Wiggle it a little bit to get it in there. And then clean off the excess. And again, there's kind of there's still a little bit of slip that's on the outside here, but what will happen is as the moisture evaporates out of this, it'll sort of recede a little bit. And I don't mind if it looks like it's sort of welded on. So in fact, that's a technique I sometimes use, is to leave a lot of globs there. I want it to look like it's welded. Okay, and now that one's assembled, but we're not done yet because when we have to be paying attention to it as it's drying. What parts could it dry first? the edge and the handle, right? So I typically will start them drying this way. So there's a little bit more drying happening up here than down here, and they'll be under plastic and drying over a period of time. I would like them to dry out evenly throughout. Once they're dry, then they get some sort of a treatment, a glaze treatment of some sort, various kinds. This one was pretty straightforward. I've got layered glazes on the inside. There's two different black glazes that I made. The idea is that I'm hoping it looks like it used to have used motor oil in it. So if you look inside the pots over there, you say they look kind of grody, and they're intended to do that way. So, and that's beautiful because then I don't have to be precise about the glaze. Just spray some glaze in there and watch some TV, and then like, oh, it's fine. So, and then the outside, as all the glazes are sprayed on as well. So this is just an old blue, looks like kind of something old industrial object painted that kind of bluish color. This one, same treatment altogether. It's just two layers of black inside there, and then my iron red glaze on the outside. Of course, waxed on the bottom so it doesn't stick. Until you do something like this guy over here. I'm going to kind of clean my hands up before I touch it because its surface likes to grab all kinds of stuff on your fingers. The bottom has color on it. So this is a red iron oxide wash that I make that goes on bone dry greenware. And then it goes in the bisque kiln and becomes a permanent part of the pot. And then I have a couple of different colors of rust underglaze that I brush on and wipe off to do that. And that's after the inside has been glazed. And because I like a nice cohesive look to the pot, I have to buy these guys, and they're white. But I found something interesting. With the right glaze, you can heat them up, blow some glaze on there, and not have them white anymore. So I'm able to do that. Well, I have a little trick for making the rusty pits. Piece of broken kiln shelf when it's leather hard. So that's how I make my stuff. Thanks. Any questions? So one other thing I'd like to say, booth 73 is right over there. Thanks, guys.